Everyone knows the name Shaka Zulu, the legendary warrior who built a fearsome empire. But what if the story you know is missing its first and most important chapter? What if the real architect of the Zulu kingdom wasn't Shaka, but the forgotten king who discovered him, trained him, and handed him the keys to power? This is the story of the brilliant strategist who was ultimately overshadowed by his own creation, Dingiswayo, the king who made Shaka Zulu possible. History loves victors. Its pages are filled with the names of conquerors who burned the brightest. But sometimes the most important stories aren't in the fire, but in the quiet spaces between the flames. This is one of those stories. And it doesn't start with a king on a throne, but with a prince on the run. A young man whose world was shattered by betrayal. Before he was the great King Dingiswayo, he was just Godongwana, son of Job, chief of a small northern Nguni clan called the Mthethwa. Born around 1760, Godongwana grew up in a world of fierce competition. The fertile lands of southeastern Africa were getting crowded and clans were constantly fighting over resources. In this landscape, leadership was a blood sport and ambition could get you killed. Godongwana and his brother Tana had that dangerous ambition. They believed their father Job was too old and set in his ways to lead. So they plotted to overthrow him. It was a huge gamble for the future of their people, but it failed spectacularly. The plot was discovered. In the chaos that followed, Tana was killed and Godongwana was badly wounded. He barely escaped with his life. Forced to flee his home and everything he'd ever known. He was now a fugitive, haunted by a failed coup and his father's anger. Nursed back to health by a loyal sister, the disgraced prince began a long journey into exile. He wandered through the foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains, finding shelter with neighboring peoples like the Kwaib and Elangini. It was during this time of hardship that he shed the name Godongwana, the name of a failed prince, and took a new one that captured his struggle, Dingiswayo, which means the one in distress or the banished one. But this exile, this period of suffering would become the very thing that forged a new kind of leader. A normal prince would have learned about war and politics in his father's court. Dingiswayo's classroom was the vast, unpredictable wilderness of southern Africa. He learned about the world not from the top down, but from the bottom up. He learned new languages, understood different customs, and saw the strengths and weaknesses of other clans, not as a royal, but as a survivor. Oral traditions, while debated, paint a vivid picture of his travels. One of the most famous stories tells of him meeting a European traveler, maybe a Scottish explorer named Dr. Cowan, who was trying to journey from the Cape Colony to Delagoa Bay. According to legend, Dingiswayo served as the man's guide. This would have been a life-changing encounter. He would have seen, possibly for the first time, a horse and a firearm. These weren't just objects. They were symbols of a whole new way of thinking about power. Whether that specific meeting happened or not, Dingiswayo's travels definitely exposed him to revolutionary ideas. He saw long-distance trade routes, the movement of goods, and likely watched the military drills of Portuguese soldiers near the trading hub of Delagoa Bay. He saw formations, discipline, and a chain of command totally different from the chaotic brawls of the Nguni clans. These experiences planted a seed. He started to imagine a different future, one where power wasn't just about how many cattle you owned or how brave your warriors were. He saw the potential for organization, for discipline, for a state built on more than just tradition. He began to think not like a clan chief, but like a nation builder. Years passed. Back home, his father, Job, died. The chieftainship went to Dingiswayo's brother, Mayu. When news reached him, Dingiswayo knew his long exile was over. It was time to go home. But he wouldn't return as Godongwana, the wounded fugitive. He would return as Dingiswayo, a man hardened by the wild and armed with a vision that would change southern African history forever. The wanderer was about to become a king. When a banished prince returns, it's always high drama. And when Dingiswayo came back to the Mthethwa lands around 1807, he wasn't begging for forgiveness. He was there to claim what was his. Oral tradition says he arrived on a horse and carrying a gun. Objects of such alien power that they instantly made him seem like a figure from a prophecy. To his people, he looked like a sign of a new era. His brother Mayu was now chief, but his position was weak. The Mthethwa were impressed by power and destiny, and the sight of this transformed prince was enough to sway their loyalty. The takeover was fast. Some say Mayu was simply pushed aside. Others suggest a more ruthless version of events where he was lured back after fleeing and then executed. Either way, the result was the same. Dingiswayo the exile was now the undisputed king of the Mthethwa. But being king wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. Dingiswayo had no interest in being just another chief overseeing the same old cycle of cattle raids and petty fights. He had a bigger vision, one inspired by his travels. His goal wasn't just to rule, but to build something entirely new. His first and most revolutionary move was to completely reorganize the military. For centuries, Nguni warfare was informal. Men were called from their homes, fought under local leaders, and then went back to their fields. Armies were temporary, and loyalties were fragmented. Dingiswayo saw this as a massive weakness. He needed a force loyal not to their local clans but to him and the Mthethwa state. He took the traditional age-grade system, the Amabutho, and turned it into a standing army. Historically, these were just groups of boys who went through initiation together. Dingiswayo repurposed this cultural tradition, forming regiments of men of the same age from all across his territory. These regiments were housed in royal barracks, drilling and living together, far from their homes and local influences. This was a stroke of genius. First, it created a professional, disciplined fighting force. Second, and more importantly, it shattered old clan loyalties and forged a new national identity. A man's first loyalty was now to his regiment and his king. He gave each regiment its own name and insignia, sparking intense pride and competition between them. This was the birth of the organized army that would later define the Zulu Empire. But Dingiswayo knew a strong army needed a strong economy. He turned his attention to trade, securing routes and forging an alliance with the Tsanga people to trade with the Portuguese at Delagoa Bay. The main export was ivory, which brought in European goods like cloth, beads, and new technology. This trade brought incredible wealth, allowing Dingiswayo to reward his followers and fund his army. He was no longer just a warrior king. He was a merchant king. But what truly set Dingiswayo apart was his political philosophy. He preferred assimilation over annihilation. When he defeated a clan, he didn't wipe them out. He let the local chiefs stay in power as long as they swore loyalty to him. This policy of diplomacy and incorporation built a network of allies instead of a landscape of bitter enemies. The Mthethwa paramountcy, as it was called, grew into a confederation of over 30 chiefdoms, all looking to Dingiswayo as their leader. In just a few years, Dingiswayo had transformed the entire region. He had created a disciplined army, a booming economy, and a stable political confederacy. He had laid the foundation for an empire. All he needed was someone to build on it. He needed a general of unmatched talent to lead his new army. He would find that weapon in an outcast, a young man burning with ambition. His name was Shaka. A great king might have a court full of warriors, but it takes a true leader to spot a genius in the crowd. Dingiswayo had that gift. His royal court was a magnet for ambitious young men. But one of them had a different kind of fire. He was an outcast, the illegitimate son of the minor Zulu chief Senzangakona, who had been pushed into a life of humiliation with his mother, Nandi. After finding refuge with the Mthethwa, this young man, Shaka, was just another soldier in Dingiswayo's army, but not for long. Shaka was a powder keg of resentment and raw talent. He was stronger, fiercer, and smarter than his peers. And he carried the scars of a childhood of ridicule. Where others saw an aggressive troublemaker, Dingiswayo saw himself. He recognized the same restless energy that had once driven him into exile. He saw a mind that wasn't bound by tradition. Dingiswayo took Shaka under his wing, giving him the platform he desperately needed. It became one of the most fateful mentorships in military history. Dingiswayo was the architect who had designed a new way of war. Shaka would become its most ruthless and effective champion. Under Dingiswayo's command, Shaka quickly made a name for himself. He wasn't satisfied with traditional fighting. At the time, warriors used a long throwing spear, the assegai. They'd hurl them from a distance and often retreat, leading to long, indecisive battles. Shaka thought this was cowardly. He wanted close-quarters combat, a fight to the death. He made two revolutionary changes. First, he redesigned the spear, creating the short, broad-bladed ikawa, named for the sucking sound it made when pulled from an enemy's body. This spear was for stabbing, not throwing. Second, he introduced a larger, stronger shield that could be used to hook an opponent's shield aside, exposing their body to a lethal thrust from the ikawa. This was a complete philosophical overhaul of warfare. It required incredible bravery and discipline, but Dingiswayo's new Amabutho system was the perfect vehicle for Shaka's radical ideas. Instead of shutting him down, the king encouraged him, promoting him until he was a senior commander of the elite EZQ regiment. With Dingiswayo's blessing, Shaka perfected his tactics. He made his warriors train barefoot to toughen their feet for faster, longer charges. He developed the famous horns of the buffalo formation, a central chest to hit the enemy head-on while two horns encircled and destroyed them from the sides. The results were terrifyingly effective. As Dingiswayo's general, Shaka led the Mthethwa forces against rival clans, crushing them with a speed and finality never seen before. Shaka was proving that Dingiswayo's reforms, when executed with pure ruthlessness, were unstoppable. Dingiswayo built the engine. Shaka learned to redline it. Their bond deepened. Dingiswayo became the father figure Shaka never had. For Dingiswayo, Shaka was the ultimate proof that his theories on warfare and politics were correct. The ultimate test of their relationship came in 1816. Shaka's biological father, Senzangakona, chief of the small Zulu clan, died. Shaka's half-brother, Sigajana, claimed the title. This was the moment Shaka had been waiting for, a chance to claim his birthright. But he was still Dingiswayo's subject and couldn't act without his permission. Shaka went to his king and made his case. A lesser ruler might have hesitated, afraid of empowering such an ambitious subordinate, but Dingiswayo didn't. He saw the big picture. A loyal Shaka as chief of the Zulus would be a valuable asset. In a decisive move, Dingiswayo lent Shaka a full regiment of Mthethwa warriors. With this overwhelming force, Shaka marched into Zulu territory. Sigujana's support vanished and Shaka seized the chieftainship, killing his half-brother. The mentor had officially handed the keys to his student. Shaka was now a king, but he remained a loyal vassal to Dingiswayo. The Mthethwa Confederacy was at the peak of its power, and at the tip of its spear was Shaka, the weapon Dingiswayo himself had forged. But history has a cruel sense of irony. The weapon that Dingiswayo created to secure his empire would soon be the force that consumed it. With Shaka leading the Zulu clan, the Mthethwa Confederacy seemed invincible. Dingiswayo's blend of diplomacy and military might, now supercharged by Shaka's tactical genius, had created a regional superpower. But in the game of power, every strong king creates a strong rival. For Dingiswayo, that rival was Zwaide, king of the Ndwandwe clan to the north. Like Dingiswayo, Zwaide was a unifier and an expansionist. He saw the Mthethwa Confederacy as a direct threat to his own ambitions. The rivalry wasn't just political, it was personal. Zwaide's mother, Tambatsi, was said to be a sorceress who collected the skulls of defeated chiefs, and she badly wanted Dingiswayo's. The conflict finally erupted around 1818. The exact trigger is lost to history, but Dingiswayo marshaled his forces for a decisive strike against the Ndwandwe. He called on all his commanders, including his star general Shaka, to join the campaign. What happened next is a tragedy shrouded in mystery. As the Mthethwa army advanced, Dingiswayo was somehow separated from his forces, ambushed, and captured by Zwide's warriors. How could such a brilliant strategist be caught so easily? Some theories point to treachery. A controversial view suggests Shaka deliberately held back his troops, eager to take over. A more likely story is that Shaka's forces were simply delayed and couldn't get there in time. A third tradition claims Dingiswayo, tired of the endless bloodshed, walked willingly into the enemy camp, hoping to negotiate peace. It was a noble but fatal mistake. Zwide wasn't interested in talking. He had captured his greatest rival, and he wasn't going to let him go. Before the Mthethwa army could even attempt a rescue, King Dingiswayo was executed by Zwide's command. The news of Dingiswayo's death shattered the Mthethwa Confederacy. The pillar holding the entire structure together was gone. The army, leaderless and demoralized, fell apart without even fighting a major battle. The great confederacy built over a decade of careful work crumbled in an instant. Zwide and the Ndwandwe were now the supreme power. It looked like Dingiswayo's legacy was over. But Zwide had made a critical mistake. He had killed the architect, but he had left the weapon on the field. In the chaos that followed, only one man had the authority and ambition to lead: Shaka. He moved with lightning speed, absorbing the leaderless Mthethwa regiments into his own Zulu forces. He effectively inherited Dingiswayo's entire army and power base. The Mthethwa people, recognizing Shaka as the true heir to Dingiswayo's military might, pledged their loyalty to him. The grief and rage Shaka felt over his mentor's death was enormous. He now had one goal: avenge Dingiswayo and annihilate Zwide. This was no longer politics. It was a blood feud. And in this new war, there would be none of Dingiswayo's restraint. Shaka was about to unleash the full terrifying power of the military machine they had built together. What followed was the Great Zulu Civil War. Shaka, using his perfected tactics, met Zwide's massive army in a series of epic battles like the Battle of Cockley Hill. Though outnumbered, Shaka's superior discipline and strategy won the day. He didn't just defeat the Ndwandwe, he systematically destroyed them, scattering their people across southern Africa. With Zwide defeated, Shaka stood as the undisputed master of the region. But the kingdom he built was not the one Dingiswayo had imagined. Where Dingiswayo built a loose confederation, Shaka forged a centralized militaristic empire where all power flowed to him. Where Dingiswayo incorporated his rivals, Shaka crushed them. The Mthethwa Confederacy was gone, consumed and reborn as the Zulu Kingdom. Shaka's conquests would make his name a legend across the continent. His story was so dramatic, so brutal, and so powerful that it cast a deep shadow over everything that came before it. In the blaze of Shaka's glory, the quieter brilliance of his mentor was lost. The student hadn't just surpassed the master. He had accidentally erased him from history. History likes to keep things simple. It creates icons and boils down complex eras into single towering figures. For the story of the great Nguni unification in southern Africa, that figure is Shaka Zulu. But the towering empire Shaka built didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built on a foundation painstakingly laid by another man. That man was Dingiswayo. Dingiswayo was the architect. He was the visionary who returned from exile, looked at a world of feuding clans and imagined something more: a unified, stable nation. His innovations were revolutionary. It was Dingiswayo who first turned the Amabutho age system into a disciplined standing army, the very engine of the future Zulu Empire. It was Dingiswayo who understood that real power comes from a strong economy and built the trade networks that brought wealth and new ideas into his kingdom. And it was Dingiswayo who pioneered a confederacy built on diplomacy rather than terror. Shaka inherited every one of these pillars. He didn't create the regimental system. He perfected it. He didn't invent the idea of a unified state. He radicalized it. Without Dingiswayo's decade of patient state building, Shaka would have remained an outcast from a minor clan. There would have been no Mthethwa army for him to join, no powerful patron to spot his talent, and no military backing to seize the Zulu throne. Without Dingiswayo, the name Shaka Zulu might never have been known. So why is one man a global icon and the other a historical footnote? It might be because of the nature of their stories. Dingiswayo's work was that of a statesman, gradual, structural, subtle. Shaka's work was that of a conqueror, explosive, violent, and dramatic. History remembers earthquakes more than the slow tectonic shifts that caused them. Shaka's legacy was written in blood and fire, and its heat has lasted for centuries. But to remember only Shaka is to see only the final act of a much longer play. It's celebrating the lightning bolt while ignoring the storm that gathered it. Dingiswayo's story is a powerful reminder that history is a chain of influence where every great figure stands on the shoulders of those who came before. He was the unifier, the innovator, and the mentor who shaped a king and changed a continent. He is the king who created Shaka Zulu, and he deserves to be remembered. If you believe more hidden histories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell and let us know in the comments what other forgotten figures from history should we cover next. Thanks for watching.